They say fear is a primal thing. Most species evolve past it, program it out, regulate it, or suppress it chemically. They call it a relic of violent ancestors, a hindrance to progress. But humanity, we didn't purge fear. We refined it, honed it, built entire philosophies around it. We don't run from fear. We wield it. That's what they never understood, until it was too late. I was stationed on the edge of human space, a lonely outpost known as Bastion 7, orbiting the dead world of Harkon. Cold, silent, forgotten by most of the galaxy. But we weren't alone. We were watching. Waiting. The proximity alarms lit up around 0200 station time. At first, we assumed it was a solar fragment or rogue asteroid, nothing unusual that far from the core systems. But the pattern didn't match. Too deliberate. Too symmetrical. We knew what it was even before sensors got a lock. A Zentari probe. Small. Sleek. Packed with enough sensors to dissect an entire ecosystem from orbit. It crept across the demarcation line like it had every right to be there. Command gave no order. They didn't have to. The probe disappeared in a flash of blue plasma, melted into atoms by an orbital lance fired from the station's hidden battery. We sent no warning. No explanation. Just a 6-word transmission, looped and transmitted across all open channels. This is your only warning. Leave. Within an hour, every Zentari listening post went dark. Council delegates went into emergency session. The Union of Peaceful Species released a statement condemning our reckless aggression. Condemnation. Outrage. Posturing. The usual. What they didn't realize, what most species never bothered to remember, was that we used to beg for their acceptance. Humanity's first foray into galactic society was marked by diplomacy, trade, cooperation. We offered culture, technology, our best and brightest. In return, they gave us scraps and contempt. And when the Alvanti came, when they tore through our colonies, harvesting our people, our children, the galaxy watched from behind bureaucratic walls. They debated, they deliberated, and they let it happen. That was 143 years ago. Since then, no one has crossed the demarcation line and returned unchanged. My name is Commander Rex Halden, Terran Defense Command. 3rd Fleet. 42 confirmed operations. I've served on the front, in the core, and beyond the fringe. I've buried friends. I've executed enemies. And I've lived long enough to see the galaxy shift from ignoring us to fearing us. They think we're monsters. Isolationist. Cold. Dangerous. And maybe we are. But we're monsters they made. And we remember every slight, every betrayal, every life abandoned by a council that calls itself civilized. The demarcation line isn't just a border. It's a grave marker. A silent warning carved into the stars. And when the Zentari forgot that, they reminded the entire galaxy why it exists. No species enters human space. Not because we stop them, but because we don't have to. The Zentari Confederation called it a mistake. A miscalculation. They claimed the probe had malfunctioned, gone off course. Their spokespeople offered a hollow apology and requested a mutual de-escalation dialogue. As if we didn't know better. As if it had been an accident. But we remembered the last time the Zentari sent explorers into human space. It ended with 12 missing ships and a declaration from their Grand Minister that humans were a dangerously unstable subspecies unsuitable for integration. We hadn't responded then, not with words, anyway. We simply made sure none of their ships were ever found. What we did with them, that was something the Confederation chose not to pursue further. This time, they were testing our silence again. So we reminded them what it meant. 3 days after the probe was destroyed, 2 Zentari exploration vessels slipped toward the outer ring of the Vega system. They kept just outside our formal border, pinging sensor sweeps, collecting passive data. Watching us. Their logs probably called it reconnaissance. To us, it was an incursion, calculated, baited, and deliberate. We deployed nothing visibly. No ships launched. No missiles armed. No communication sent. Instead, the silence protocol was activated. The protocol was born after the Alvanti War, when we learned that making the enemy fear you wasn't enough. You had to make them question their own sanity. The tactic didn't involve confrontation. It involved erasure of data, of functionality, of confidence. Within the hour, both Centauri vessels began reporting anomalous sensor returns. Shadows where there were none. Glitches in starfield alignments. Their engines began cycling on and off irregularly. Communications to their home command grew distorted, fragmented, then ceased entirely. Their internal chronometers began desensing. One vessel's life support registered phantom crew members. Another locked down its med bay, believing it was under biological attack. In reality, we never touched the ships directly. Spectre drones, built to move without detection, had infiltrated their systems via microbursts of quantum interference. They weren't physical sabotage units. They were hallucinations given form by algorithm. They turned the Centauri's own technology into a psychological weapon. When the Confederation lost contact with the vessels, they panicked. They deployed a third ship, an emergency diplomatic vessel fitted with envoy credentials and neutral status. A Vocari ambassador was aboard. That caught our attention. The Vocari were intermediaries. Six-eyed, cloaked in shimmering fur, and bred for empathy. They were the kind of species the Council loved to trot out when things got tense. Harmless, charismatic, good at appearing unbiased. But we knew better. We'd interrogated one during the Eclipse Summit riots. Even the best masks crack eventually. They requested parley on Mimir Station, one of our oldest Outer Rim installations. I accepted, not because I expected a solution, but because I wanted them to see what they were dealing with. They kept thinking we were bluffing. That behind our cold silence, there was still some lingering desire to be part of their galaxy. They didn't understand. We weren't looking to rejoin the galaxy. We were waiting for the galaxy to realize they'd already lost us. The Vocari ambassador arrived wearing ceremonial threads laced with gold and neuroreactive fibers that shimmered with every pulse of her elevated heart rate. She stepped onto Mimir Station like she expected reverence, or at least the cold formality most species still thought we cared about. But there was no welcoming committee. No diplomats. No ceremony. Just me, in full battle uniform, flanked by two Terran Marines whose silence said more than a speech ever could. She introduced herself in perfect Terran standard, her 6 eyes blinking in coordinated patterns meant to appear soothing. "Ambassador Trelsan of the Vocari Mediation League," she said with a practiced calm. "I come on behalf of the Centauri Confederation, and by proxy, the United Galactic Council." I didn't answer. I simply turned and walked. If she wanted to talk, she could do it while keeping up. We passed through Mimir's core, an ancient battle-worn station perched on the edge of a gas giant's magnetic belt. The corridors hummed with kinetic shielding and redundant gravity stabilizers. No banners. No symbols of pride. Just exposed steel, reinforced plating, and the deep echo of footsteps in a place built to withstand war. "I must say, Commander," she continued, her tone shifting from diplomatic warmth to forced familiarity, "this station is austere. I had assumed humanity would have evolved beyond such cold militarism." I stopped at the entrance to Memorial Hall and turned to face her. "We did evolve. But evolution isn't always forward." She followed me into the hall, and for the first time since she stepped aboard, she went silent. Thousands of names stretched across the walls, not etched, but burned into carbon-titanium alloy. Each name pulsed with a faint blue glow, memorializing the dead from the Orion collapse, the Soul Harvest, the siege of Delphi's Reach. No fanfare. No flowers. Just names. Just loss. Floating above the floor, holograms cycled through faces. Children. Civilians. Scientists. Soldiers. Their last recorded words, spoken in soft whispers, played through the chamber, an endless chorus of goodbye. The Vocari's fur flattened. Her pupils narrowed. She could feel it now. Not the grief, but the promise. "This is a monument to rage," she said softly. "No," I replied. "It's a monument to restraint. If it were rage, there wouldn't be a galaxy left." She tried again. "Why hold on to such pain? Why not rejoin the Council, reclaim your place? Isolation only feeds fear." I met her gaze, unblinking. "The Council feeds on apologies. We feed on memory. You fear us because you don't understand what we're willing to do. What we've had to do. The silence stretched long between us. Finally, she asked the question she'd been sent to ask. What would it take for humanity to trust again? I almost laughed. Instead, I answered with the only truth that mattered. Trust was buried with those names. What's left is consequence. She left the station an hour later, visibly shaken. She didn't say goodbye. That was good. It meant she was starting to understand. The Vocari ambassador returned to the Confederation with her dignity intact but her confidence shattered. She spoke of sterile halls, empty stairs, and the weight of a silence so thick it felt weaponized. Her official report was laced with phrases like post-traumatic militarism, deep-rooted grief fixation, and strategic paranoia. But underneath all that political jargon, one message bled through: do not test them again. The Confederation didn't listen. The Zentari, in particular, took offense. They saw our restraint as weakness. Our refusal to rejoin the galactic fold as a challenge to their authority. So, they did what all insecure powers do: they escalated. They deployed the Ovrax, a dreadnought-class capital ship, 76 kilometers long, coated in adaptive alloy, and armed with a fleet's worth of energy lances, particle cannons, and black glass shielding. It was the most advanced vessel in their arsenal, a mobile fortress with a crew of 15,000 and a support wing of 50 smaller interceptors. They positioned it just outside Gliese 49D, one of our smallest outposts, a civilian station barely hosting 300 colonists and a single corvette on rotation. The message was clear: we're not afraid of you. But fear was never the point. We didn't scramble fighters, didn't issue demands, didn't even raise shields. Instead, High Command activated Spectre Protocol, and for the first time in nearly a decade, a psychological warfare op went live. Spectre units were our finest creation. Not drones. Not soldiers. Ghosts. Built not to destroy, but to unmake the enemy's sense of reality. Within minutes of activation, the Ovrax S-sensors began returning contradictory readings. Internal diagnostics began flagging phantom pressure leaks. Environmental controls reported sudden temperature shifts. Lights flickered sporadically. Crew members reported hearing whispers in languages they didn't recognize. We never boarded. We didn't need to. By the third hour, the Ovrax SAI attempted to shut itself down, believing it had been compromised by a hostile cognitive virus. Their command staff sealed themselves on the bridge, convinced an internal mutiny was underway. Life support systems initiated purge cycles at random. Simulations began running without prompts, scenarios involving catastrophic decompression, reactor meltdowns, and firestorms that had never occurred. Their own minds betrayed them. All of this orchestrated from over 1 million kilometers away. Then, without fanfare, the dreadnought lost propulsion. A controlled gravitic pulse locked its mass and pushed it, slowly and deliberately, back toward the Confederation's border. It drifted like a ghost ship, powerless, silent, and bearing a single message etched into its hull by automated carving drones. This is mercy. The Council convened in emergency session. Debates exploded. Accusations flew. Some argued for immediate retaliation. Others warned against further escalation. But for the first time, the fear was real. Tangible. They had seen the edge of something older and darker than war. Something patient. We didn't need to fight. We simply let them step into the dark. And reminded them what it feels like to be hunted. The galaxy didn't know how to process what had happened. The Ovrax, their symbol of power and technological supremacy, hadn't just been disabled, it had been broken, its mind shattered before a single weapon fired. No casualties. No wreckage. Just a dead colossus returned like an offering, wrapped in silence and dread. And for all their talk of diplomacy and progress, the species of the Galactic Council suddenly found themselves remembering what humans had always known: that fear isn't a weakness. It's a tool. A warning. The Council spun up damage control. The media circuits, especially the Hresari signal hubs, downplayed the event. Tactical malfunction, they claimed. Data corruption. Environmental irregularities. Anything but the truth. Because the truth was worse than war. The truth was that we hadn't just outgunned them, we'd unmade their confidence. But behind closed doors, the panic spread like fire through vacuum. A few of our old allies, what few we still had, sent discreet messages. The Jarelians, always pragmatic, warned us through an encrypted channel. The Council is considering a joint task force. Not an invasion, yet. But presence. Symbolic entry into human space. To save face. I showed the message to High Command at Arc Bastion, buried deep under the surface of Mars. The chamber was as quiet as ever. Steel, silence, and strategy. The triumvirate sat on their obsidian thrones, emotionless, patient. They didn't react with alarm. They didn't debate. They asked me one question: how loud should the response be? We didn't talk about battles anymore. Not in terms of wins or losses. We talked about messages. Signals to the rest of the galaxy that could not be misunderstood. The triumvirate approved deployment of Protocol Veil, a measure designed not for annihilation, but for psychological exposure. We wouldn't strike first. We'd simply make sure that, if they came, they would see. As preparations began, we increased the density of our outer patrols, not with warships, but with null beacons and distortion fields. From the outside, human space looked like a black hole, no comms, no pings, just silence. And yet, the Council moved forward. 8 fleets, from 6 different species. They formed what they called the Peacekeeping Coalition, meant to ensure safe passage for galactic navigation. Publicly, it was a noble initiative. Behind the scenes, it was an expeditionary probe, a toe dipped into the unknown to see if the stories were true. They came in through Mu Serpentis, a quiet star system near one of our old mining zones. They expected resistance. They brought translators, medics, even diplomats. We let them through. No fire. No interception. Just deep, endless quiet. At first, nothing seemed wrong. They cruised unchallenged through our outer systems, emboldened. Some even began broadcasting status updates, reporting no significant threat presence. And then the anomalies began. Navigation drift. Sensor ghosts. Shadows that didn't move like shadows. A crew reported hearing cries in the static. Another reported seeing ships that weren't there. No pattern. No consistency. That was the pattern. And still, not a single shot was fired. Because we knew what they hadn't figured out yet. Fear doesn't need a weapon. It just needs to be believed. They thought it was psychological warfare. That the drifting ships and corrupted systems were advanced versions of Spectre Protocol. That the anomalies were hallucinations triggered by some neural broadcast. That all of it was manipulation, an illusion meant to unnerve, not harm. They were wrong. What they were seeing was just the beginning. The 8 fleets of the so-called Peacekeeping Coalition had barely crossed into the shadow of the Vega sector when the effects began to compound. Their gravity wells destabilized. Fusion reactors reported theoretical particles, tachyon echoes that shouldn't exist in real space. Star maps misaligned by microns that grew into kilometers. It wasn't an attack. It was entropy, cultivated and released like a virus. You see, human space isn't just defended. It's transformed. Over the last century, we folded and sculpted our territory with technology the rest of the galaxy declared illegal. Dark energy siphons, subspace fragmentation nets, and recursive topological compression. Space here doesn't behave the way they expect it to. Time runs just a little slower. Mass behaves unpredictably. You don't move through our space. You drift into it, like prey into a web. And once you're in, you're part of the trap. By the second day, half the peacekeeping fleet had lost all long-range communication. Proximity sensors failed. Ships drifted without realizing it. Some found themselves light years off course, redirected by artificial wormholes masked as gravity shadows. Entire squadrons vanished from fleet formations, only to reappear days later in orbits they hadn't plotted. They thought they were still navigating on their own. They didn't realize we were guiding them, corralling them like cattle toward one place. Solstice V. A dead world. No atmosphere. No settlements. But above it, in the skies, a ring of Terran vessels, ghost ships, unmanned, abandoned war relics held in perfect suspension by magnetic tethers. We called it the graveyard. That's where they arrived. One by one. Not all at once, Not with ceremony. Just drifting vessels, confused, frightened, malfunctioning. Surrounded by silence and ruin. Every weapon they'd brought, disabled. Every broadcast, jammed. Every escape route, closed. And then I spoke. Not from a command ship, not from a government pulpit, but from a lone Terran scout vessel, hovering silently in orbit, a single transmission looping across all known Council channels. You were warned. You entered without consent. You attempted to intimidate with numbers, expecting resistance. You got silence instead. Because silence is the sound we make when we're deciding what kind of lesson to teach. No threats. No demands. Just the voice of humanity speaking into the void, letting it echo. Leave now. Or stay and understand. The transmission cut. The silence returned. And they left. Not all at once. Some stayed longer, trying to piece together what had happened, searching for answers in their own broken logs and fragmented data. But eventually, every ship turned around. Not because they were ordered to. Not because they were defeated. But because they understood. They weren't welcome. And worse, they were never in control. They withdrew without celebration, without a single formal declaration. No apologies were offered. No explanations given. The fleets turned in silence, leaving human space behind them like it was cursed. They didn't even wait for escort or transit clearance, just limped back into the void, broken and sobered. The great experiment of reasserting Council authority over humanity had failed before it truly began. And they knew that if they had pushed even one step further, they might not have come back at all. The Council went dark for nearly a galactic quarter-cycle. Communications between species were sparse, strained. Exploratory missions were paused. Cartographers began labeling our region with new warnings in red glyphs and pulsating alert scripts. Unstable territory. Restricted zone. High risk of collapse. The truth wasn't hidden, it was just buried under euphemisms, because to say it aloud would be to admit fear. But the galaxy understood now. On Mars, we didn't hold a press conference. There were no victory parades on Earth. No high-spirited chants in orbit. We simply stood down from high alert and resumed our routines. Patrols shifted back to long-range pattern sweeps. Spectre units deactivated and returned to hibernation. Stations returned to Black Ops mode, broadcasting nothing, watching everything. Because we weren't angry. We were ready. And we always would be. I returned to the Resolute Dawn, our cruiser stationed in Saturn orbit. From there, I watched the ice rings spin in eternal silence, a constant reminder that even in the vastness of space, some things endure unchanged. I took my post in the observation bay, reviewing logs, listening to faint signals from deep space buoys. Most were quiet. A few carried whispers. Young officers, fresh out of training, approached me sometimes. Wide-eyed, full of theories and questions they were too afraid to ask anyone else. One of them, Ensign Roth, stood beside me one night and asked, "Commander, what if they come back stronger next time? What if they really try to fight?" I didn't look away from the viewport. I just said, "Then we remind them." He hesitated. Remind them of what? I finally turned to him. That fear isn't something to be overcome. It's something to be respected. That silence is not weakness. It's the calm before the storm. That you don't enter someone's house just because you think they've gone quiet. And most of all, we remind them of what we've always known. I tapped the console. The screen shifted to a view of the stars beyond the border. Empty. Still. And terrifying. No species enters human space, I said quietly. Not because we stop them. Not because we beg. But because when we close the door, we don't open it again. He didn't ask anything after that. He just stood beside me, watching the stars, as the galaxy spun on in silence. And somewhere, far away, I knew they were still whispering our name. Not in anger. In fear.